They gave me 7 days to hand over part of the company I built from nothing. Not to my fiancée, to her parents. By the time they realized I wasn't bluffing, the wedding was canceled, and I'd sent them the bill instead. My name is William. I was born in Ohio, raised in the quiet outer ring of Columbus, and taught early that stability mattered more than applause. My father was an engineer who believed in systems and redundancy. My mother ran a small accounting practice from home and believed in margins and patience. I absorbed both lessons without realizing it. I studied computer science, worked longer hours than my friends, and started my first company at 27 with two other guys who eventually burned out and sold their shares back to me. By 35, I was the sole owner of a mid-sized software firm that specialized in logistics optimization. It wasn't glamorous. It was profitable. It was mine. By the time I met Emily, I thought I had already lived the hardest chapters of my life. I was wrong. The week everything broke open began quietly. That's what still unnerves me when I look back. No shouting. No warning sirens. Just a calendar reminder blinking on my phone while I stood in the kitchen, barefoot, drinking coffee that had gone cold. Emily was in the shower upstairs, humming off-key the way she always did. We were 6 weeks out from the wedding. Invitations had been sent. Deposits paid. My mother had finally stopped asking whether a courthouse ceremony might be simpler. I remember thinking, very clearly, that morning felt settled. Finished. Like a period at the end of a sentence. That illusion lasted until Thursday. Emily and I met 3 years earlier at a fundraiser hosted by a mutual friend. She had a soft confidence, the kind that didn't ask to be noticed, but somehow always was. She came from money, though she rarely spoke about it. Her parents owned several commercial properties across the Midwest and had a reputation for being thorough, polite on the surface, strategic underneath. At first, I mistook that for stability. It matched my own instincts. I liked that Emily understood contracts, liked that she asked smart questions, liked that she didn't romanticize risk. When I proposed, it felt earned. Like we were merging two steady lives into one. The first sign of trouble came during a dinner with her parents the previous Sunday. We were seated at a long table in their dining room, the kind with chairs that looked decorative but were deeply uncomfortable. Her father, Richard, had poured wine with exaggerated care. Her mother, Carol, smiled too often. So, Richard said, folding his hands, have you given any more thought to how you'll structure things after the wedding? I assumed he meant living arrangements, maybe taxes. I answered casually, talking about prenups we'd already discussed, shared accounts, boundaries. Carol nodded slowly, like she was listening to a foreign language. Emily reached for my hand under the table. Her grip was tight. Later that night, in the car, she was quiet. Your dad seemed focused, I said. She exhaled through her nose. He's just protective. That was the word she used whenever something didn't sit right. Protective. As if concern and control were interchangeable. On Thursday evening, she asked if we could talk after dinner. Not in a dramatic way. Just a sentence, slipped in while she rinsed plates. Can we sit for a minute? We sat on the couch. She tucked her legs under herself. I noticed she hadn't turned on the lamps. Only the kitchen light was on, throwing a dull glow across the room. She didn't look at me at first. My parents are worried, she said. I waited. They think it would be good if we formalized something before the wedding. I frowned. Formalized what? She finally met my eyes. There was something rehearsed in her expression, like she'd practiced this conversation in the mirror. They want you to transfer 20% of the company into a family trust. Their trust. The words landed without sound. No echo. Just wait. I laughed once, quietly, because it felt absurd. Why? For security, she said quickly. For us. For our future kids. They think it's important that the family has alignment. I leaned back. My chest felt tight, not with anger yet, but with something colder. They want equity, I said. Before the wedding. Yes, she said. Just 20%. And it wouldn't affect operations. They wouldn't interfere. It's just a gesture. A gesture. That word did something to me. Reduced years of risk, debt, missed sleep, and personal guarantees to a polite nod. And the timeline? I asked. She hesitated. They'd like it done within 7 days. 7 days. I stared at the wall behind her, at a framed photo from a hiking trip we'd taken in Colorado. We were smiling in that picture. Sunburned. Certain. Emily, I said carefully. You understand what you're asking. She nodded too quickly. I do. and I wouldn't bring it up if it didn't matter. Does it matter to you? I asked, or to them? Her silence answered before she did. They're just trying to protect me, she said finally. Protect us. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A neighbor's porch light flicked on. I built that company, I said. Not with their money. Not with their advice. With loans I signed personally. With risk I carried alone. I know, she said softly. And they respect that. I turned around. Then why don't they respect my ownership? Her eyes flashed, just for a moment. Annoyance. Fear. Something else. They think you're being defensive. That was when I felt it. Not anger. Not yet. A fracture. Hairline, but real. I need time, I said. This isn't something you drop on someone with a deadline. She nodded, relief flooding her face too quickly. Of course. Take the week. Just don't shut down. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house settle, replaying every interaction I'd had with her parents. Every comment about legacy. Every sideways compliment about my ambition. By morning, the story had shifted. Emails arrived from Richard, then Carol. Polite. Warm. Attached documents. Draft agreements for review. Emily watched me read them at the kitchen table, her coffee untouched. They really went all out, she said lightly. I looked up at her. Did you know they'd already prepared this? She looked away. They move fast. Fast. Efficient. Decisive. Words that sound admirable until they're pointed at your throat. By Sunday, I realized something else. The deadline wasn't about paperwork. It was about obedience. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. The wedding was supposed to be in 6 weeks. They gave me 7 days. That was the moment the balance tipped. Not because of the demand itself, but because of how calmly everyone expected me to accept it. By Monday, the request had stopped feeling like a conversation and started feeling like a deadline someone else was managing. I woke before my alarm and lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. Emily was still asleep beside me, turned away, one arm curled under the pillow. The week before, that sight would have grounded me. Now it felt like a photograph from another life. I left early for the office, taking my coffee to go and barely tasting it. The drive was familiar enough that my body handled it without my mind's help. When I parked, I stayed in the car longer than usual, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the building wake up. Lights flicked on floor by floor. My company. My responsibility. Inside my office, I opened the email from Richard again. The subject line was polite. Neutral. Something like family trust, draft for review. No pressure implied. The pressure lived between the lines. The document was clean. Too clean. Carefully worded clauses, professional formatting, generous language that promised respect while quietly carving out access. 20% placed into a family trust controlled by Emily's parents. Non-voting, on paper, but with inspection rights. Reporting requirements. Protective provisions that all pointed in one direction. A permanent presence. I didn't finish reading before I called my lawyer. Megan answered on the second ring. She'd been with me since the early days, when the company was an idea and my personal guarantee was the only thing keeping the lights on. I got your email, she said. Tell me this is hypothetical. It's not, I said. They want it done within 7 days. She was quiet for a beat. Then no, just that. Flat. Certain. This isn't protection, she continued. It's leverage. Once they're in, they're never out. And if your marriage ever becomes complicated, you'll be negotiating your own company with people who already think they're entitled to it. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Emily says they won't interfere. Of course she does, Megan replied. That's how this always starts. After we hung up, I sat there longer than I should have, staring at the dark screen of my laptop. I wasn't angry yet. I was unsettled, like I'd stepped onto a floor that looked solid and felt hollow under my weight. Around noon, Emily texted. Did you get a chance to talk to your lawyer? Dad's just checking in. I read it twice. Not we're worried. Not how are you feeling. Just progress tracking. I typed back something non-committal and put the phone face down on my desk. That evening, I drove to her parents' house. I told myself I wanted clarity. The truth was, I wanted to look them in the eye while I still had enough emotional distance to stay calm. Their home was exactly as I remembered. Immaculate. Controlled. Carol greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Richard shook my hand with the same firm grip he used when he wanted to remind someone he was used to being in charge. We sat in the living room, arranged neatly like pieces on a board. Emily sat close to me, close enough to signal unity, though it felt performative now. Richard didn't ease into it. "You've reviewed the trust documents," he said. "I have," I replied. "And?" Carol asked, already smiling. "I'm not doing it." The words were calm when they came out, almost gentle. Emily's body tensed beside me. Richard blinked once, slowly. "It's a reasonable step, Daniel." "It's not," I said. "It's a demand disguised as a favor." Carol's smile tightened. "We're only thinking of Emily's future." "I am Emily's future," I said. Or at least, I thought I was. The air shifted. Emily inhaled sharply. Richard leaned forward. "You're joining our family. That comes with expectations." I held his gaze. "I'm marrying your daughter. I'm not surrendering my company." Emily's hand found my arm, her fingers pressing in warning. "Please," she said quietly. "Let's not do this here." But it was already happening. Carol set her glass down with careful precision. "You're being defensive." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." I stood up. Carol looked genuinely surprised, like people didn't stand up in the middle of conversations in her house. "I need to leave," I said. Emily stood too, eyes wide. "Daniel, wait." I turned to her. "Did you know about the deadline?" She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. "I knew they wanted it handled quickly," she said. That hesitation told me everything. I nodded once. "Okay." I left without raising my voice. I drove home in silence, the weight in my chest settling into something heavier but steadier. Emily followed later. When she walked in, she didn't ask if I was okay. "You embarrassed them," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her. "I embarrassed them," I repeated. "They were trying to help," she insisted. "Now they think you don't respect them." I waited, hoping she'd say something about us. She didn't. "Do you respect me?" I asked. She blinked, thrown. "Of course." "Then why am I being asked to prove it with equity?" She crossed her arms. "It's about commitment." I nodded slowly. "So the ring isn't commitment. The wedding isn't commitment. My life with you isn't commitment. The commitment is 20% of my company." Her eyes filled with frustration. "You're twisting this." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally hearing it clearly." "What happens if I say no?" I asked. She hesitated again, this time longer. "They'll have concerns about the marriage." "Not we. They." That was the moment something inside me settled. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Recognition. I took out my phone and texted Megan. "If I cancel the wedding, what am I on the hook for?" Emily watched me type. "What are you doing?" she asked. I set the phone down. "Protecting myself." She shook her head. "You're overreacting." I met her eyes. "No. I'm responding appropriately." The 7 days weren't about giving me time to think. They were about seeing whether I'd comply. And for the first time since this started, I understood that whatever decision I made next would define more than the wedding. It would define who I was allowed to be in my own life. By Tuesday, the house had changed shape. Nothing physical was different. The furniture was where it had always been. The walls still held the same framed photos, the same half-finished ideas for a future that suddenly felt theoretical. But the air between us had tightened, like a room where the windows no longer opened. Emily moved carefully now. Her voice was softer, controlled, like she was managing a delicate client rather than sharing space with her fiancé. We slept in the same bed, but our bodies kept a respectful distance, as if even accidental contact might set something off neither of us was ready to face. I stayed late at the office, not because I needed to, but because it was the one place where my authority wasn't being negotiated. Around noon, Megan sent me a clean summary of what canceling the wedding would cost. Deposits lost. Contracts breached. Polite penalties with sharp edges. I studied the numbers longer than necessary. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't ruinous either. What stopped me wasn't the money. It was the acceptance of what canceling would mean. Not just that the wedding would end, but that the relationship I thought I was in no longer existed in the form I believed. That night, Emily asked if we could talk again. She suggested a restaurant halfway between our house and her parents' neighborhood. "Neutral ground," she said. "Somewhere calm. Somewhere public enough to keep things civil." I agreed. The place was quiet, the kind of midweek restaurant where conversations stay low and no one lingers too long. We sat across from each other with menus untouched. The waiter came and went. Neither of us noticed. "I spoke to my parents today," Emily said, fingers wrapped tightly around her water glass. "I assumed you would," I replied. "They're willing to adjust," she continued. They'd consider lowering the percentage and extending the timeline. The way she said it felt practiced, as if compromise itself were the goal, regardless of what was being compromised. This isn't a negotiation, I said. She frowned. Everything is a negotiation. I shook my head. Not trust. She leaned forward. Why are you being so inflexible? Because this doesn't end here, I thought. Because once I give, it won't stop. Because I don't want a life where love comes with conditions written in legal language. What I said instead was quieter. Because I don't want to marry into a family that sees my work as something to be controlled. Her jaw tightened. They're trying to protect me. And who's protecting me? I asked. She looked down at the table, then back at me, and for the first time, she didn't have a prepared response. You're turning this into a power struggle, she said. It already is, I replied. I just didn't start it. The silence between us stretched. I could hear a couple laughing softly at the next table. Someone's fork scraped against a plate. If you don't do this, she said finally, you're forcing me to choose. The sentence hung there, heavier than anything else she'd said. I studied her face, searching for the woman I thought I knew. I think you already have, I said. Her eyes widened. That's not fair. Then why does it feel like I'm the only one being asked to lose something? I asked. Her composure cracked. Just slightly. You don't understand how my parents are, she said. This is how they show love. I believe you, I said. Relief flickered across her face. But I don't want to live inside that, I continued. And I don't want to spend my marriage defending myself against it. Her shoulders sagged. So what are you saying? I took a breath. Let the words settle before I spoke them. I'm saying I can't marry you like this. Her breath caught. Daniel, I'm not asking you to cut them out, I said. I'm not asking you to choose me over them. I'm just saying I won't disappear into their expectations. They'll never accept that, she said quietly. I know. And if we go ahead without agreeing to something, she stopped. They'll punish you, I finished. She didn't deny it. That silence hurt more than an argument would have. We paid the bill without touching the food. Outside, the night air was sharp and clarifying. We drove home separately. At the house, she went upstairs. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of a place that no longer felt shared. My phone buzzed. It was Richard. We need to talk. This is being handled poorly. I didn't respond. Another message followed. Emily is very upset. I hope you're not putting her in an impossible position. I set the phone down and let it sit there, face down, vibrating into silence. The next few days blurred together. Emails from Carol about values. Messages from Richard about long-term thinking. Emily acting as a reluctant bridge between us, growing more exhausted with each exchange. By Friday morning, her eyes were red and her voice was tight. They're coming over tonight, she said. We need to resolve this. No, I replied. She froze. What do you mean, no? I mean I'm done meeting about it. You can't just shut them out. I can't, I said. This is my house. The words landed hard. I hadn't meant them as a weapon, but they were one. She grabbed her coat and left without another word. That afternoon, Megan called. Do you want me to start canceling things? She asked. Not yet, I said. Okay, she replied gently. But this won't calm down on its own. I know. Emily came home that night and didn't take her coat off. They gave me an ultimatum, she said. I waited. If you don't sign something by Monday, she continued, they won't come to the wedding. They won't support us, financially or otherwise. And I asked. Her eyes filled with disbelief. That matters to me. I stepped closer. If they can control whether they attend your wedding, I said, they'll always control something. She shook her head, tears finally falling. You're asking me to lose my family. No, I said softly. I'm asking you to stop letting them run ours. She covered her face. I can't. That was it. No shouting. No drama. Just an ending. I nodded once. Then we're done. She looked at me like she was waiting for me to take it back. You'd really cancel the wedding? She asked. I'm not canceling it because of equity, I said. I'm canceling it because I don't recognize the relationship anymore. I packed a bag and headed for the door. Where are you going? She asked. A hotel, I said. I'll give you space. At the door, I paused. This became a test, I said. And I'm not failing it. She didn't respond. Sunday night, I emailed Megan. Cancel everything. Send the notices. I'll pay whatever's owed. Her reply came quickly. Understood. Sitting alone in the hotel room, I felt the full weight of the decision settle in. The wedding was over. The life I'd imagined was gone. What I didn't realize yet was that Emily and her parents still thought this was a bluff. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, measured and deliberate, like people who believed patience would wear me down. Monday morning, my phone lit up before I'd even finished my first coffee. Missed calls from Emily. 2 voicemails from Richard. An email from Carol marked urgent, written in the careful, disappointed tone reserved for people who thought they were being reasonable. I didn't respond to any of it. Megan handled the cancellations efficiently. Venue first, then catering, then the smaller vendors who sounded relieved when she explained the situation. One florist even said, "Honestly, this happens more than you'd think." That stuck with me longer than it should have. By noon, the reality was official. The wedding was no longer postponed. It was canceled. Emily finally reached me late that afternoon. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said when I answered. Her voice was quiet, stripped of anger now, replaced with disbelief. "I said I would," I replied. I thought you just needed time." I leaned back in the chair, looking out at the gray sky through the hotel window. Time wouldn't change what this was. She was silent for a moment. Then, "My parents are furious." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "They think you did this to punish them," she continued. "They think you're trying to make a point." "I am," I said. "Just not the one they think." She exhaled shakily. "They want to talk." "No," I replied. There it was again. That boundary. The one she still hadn't learned to respect. "You can't just refuse," she said, frustration creeping back in. "This affects everyone." "It affects me most," I said. "And I'm done negotiating my life." She hung up shortly after that. The next move came 2 days later. An envelope was slid under my office door. No postage. Hand-delivered. Inside was a letter from Richard, printed on thick paper, and signed but unmistakably his. It talked about disappointment, about immaturity, about how walking away from a wedding over a misunderstanding showed a lack of long-term vision. It ended with a final paragraph offering to resolve this amicably if I was willing to revisit the trust discussion. They still thought the wedding was the leverage. I read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in my desk drawer. Not out of fear, out of documentation. That afternoon, Megan called again. "They've contacted me," she said. "Your former future-in-laws." I closed my eyes. "Of course they have. They're asking whether you're open to restructuring discussions," she continued. I told them no, and that any further contact should go through counsel. "Thank you." There was a pause. "Daniel, this is going to get messy before it gets quiet." "I know," I said. "I just didn't expect how personal they'd take losing control." The first public ripple hit at the end of the week. A mutual friend texted me carefully, the way people do when they think they're stepping into a minefield. "Hey, I just wanted to check in. I heard some things and wanted to make sure you're okay." I asked what she'd heard. Her reply took longer than usual. "Emily said you called off the wedding suddenly and refused to compromise. She said her parents were trying to protect her, and you took it as an insult." I stared at the message, feeling something dull settle in my chest. "That's one version," I typed back. More messages followed over the next few days. Different people. Same pattern. Confusion. Concern. Quiet judgment. Emily wasn't lying outright. She was curating, framing the story in a way that made her parents' demands sound reasonable and my refusals sound emotional. I didn't correct anyone. Not yet. Instead, I focused on closing things down properly. I moved out of the hotel and into a short-term rental. I redirected mail. I separated accounts. Clean breaks. Clear lines. Emily tried again the following week. She showed up at my office unannounced. Nora buzzed me, voice tense. "Daniel, Emily's here. She says it's important." I hesitated, then sighed. "Send her in." She looked smaller standing there, coat still on, hair pulled back hastily. Not fragile, just tired. "This isn't fair," she said, before sitting down. "You made a unilateral decision. So did your parents," I replied. "That's different," she said immediately. I raised an eyebrow. "How?" She struggled, searching for footing. "They were thinking long-term. So was I." She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the one she thought she could manage. "You didn't even give us a chance to fix it," she said. "I gave you every chance," I replied calmly. "I just didn't like the fix." Her eyes filled again. "They think you're punishing me." I shook my head. I'm protecting myself. She stood abruptly. You always have to win, don't you? The accusation surprised me. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed how she saw this. I didn't win anything, I said. I lost a relationship I thought was built on mutual respect. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if filing something away. They're going to come after you, she said quietly. I met her gaze. How? She hesitated. Reputation. Connections. They know people. That was the moment I realized just how normalized power had been in her world. If they do, I said, that tells me everything I need to know. She left without another word. The attempted pressure campaign never fully materialized. Maybe they realized I wasn't panicking. Maybe they understood that threats lose their teeth when someone has already walked away. What had happened was quieter. Emily stopped calling. Her parents stopped writing. The narrative they'd tried to control lost momentum without my participation. One evening, sitting alone in my new place, I opened my laptop and reviewed the numbers again. The deposits, the penalties, the final cost of walking away. It was a lot of money. But when I closed the spreadsheet, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I'd won, but because I'd chosen myself before it became impossible. The bill had been paid. The wedding was gone. And for the first time in weeks, the silence felt earned. The quiet didn't last forever. It just lasted long enough for me to breathe again. A week passed. Then two. Work steadied me in ways I hadn't expected. Meetings felt sharper. Decisions came easier. I slept better in the short-term rental than I had in months, even with unfamiliar walls and borrowed furniture. There was no one watching my reactions anymore. No one waiting to see if I'd bend. That was when the invoice arrived. Not from a vendor. From Emily. It came as an email attachment with a carefully neutral subject line. Wedding expenses, reconciliation. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I'd find. A spreadsheet. Her parents' style all over it. Itemized costs they claimed were joint obligations. Portions of deposits they believed I should reimburse. A note at the bottom, written by Emily herself, saying she hoped we could handle this maturely and avoid unnecessary conflict. I stared at the total. It wasn't small. And suddenly, everything clicked. They hadn't accepted the cancellation. They'd just shifted tactics. If they couldn't secure control through equity, they'd try through guilt, through money, through rewriting the story so that I was the one who owed them. I forwarded the email to Megan with one sentence. Can you confirm I owe none of this? Her reply came fast. You owe nothing. They're testing you again. That word. Again. I didn't respond to Emily right away. I let the email sit for 2 days while I reviewed my own records. Every contract, every deposit, every cancellation receipt Megan had handled on my behalf. I had paid for the wedding. All of it. Not because I had to. Because I'd wanted to. Because I believed we were building something together. By Friday, I was done being patient. I opened a new email and attached my own spreadsheet. Clear, clean, undeniable. I itemized every cost I had covered. Venue, catering, planner, rentals, non-refundable deposits, cancellation penalties, legal fees for reviewing the trust documents they'd insisted on drafting, hotel stays during the separation, moving expenses. At the bottom, I calculated the total. Then I divided it cleanly down the middle. I didn't add commentary. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain the philosophy of fairness. I wrote one short paragraph. Emily, since you and your parents believe wedding costs should be reconciled, I've attached a full accounting of the expenses I covered in good faith. Half of this reflects your share. Please let me know how you'd like to handle payment. Daniel. I hit send. I expected anger. I expected a call. I expected some dramatic pushback. What I got was silence. 3 days passed. Then my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was tight, controlled, familiar in a way that felt distant now. You sent me a bill, she said. Yes, I replied. You can't be serious. I am. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. This is petty. No, I said calmly. This is consistent. Her breath caught. My parents think you're doing this to hurt us. I'm doing this because I paid for a wedding that didn't happen, I said. And because for weeks, I was the only one expected to absorb the cost of everyone else's decisions. You canceled it, she snapped. I canceled it, I agreed. After your parents tried to buy part of my company and you supported them. Silence stretched between us. This isn't how adults handle breakups, she said finally. I smiled to myself, not out of amusement, but recognition. This is exactly how adults handle them, I said. With numbers. With clarity. Without pretending. She exhaled, long and shaky. You always have to be right. No, I said. I just stopped being wrong for everyone else. She hung up without saying goodbye. A week later, Megan forwarded me an email from their attorney. Polite. Measured. Acknowledging receipt of my invoice. Requesting time to review. 2 weeks after that, a payment hit my account. No message. No apology. Just the transfer. It covered exactly half. That was the last thing I ever received from Emily or her parents. No dramatic closure followed. No final confrontation. No public apology or whispered regret. The story didn't end with a speech or a moment that tied everything into a bow. It ended the way most real things do. With distance. With receipts. With silence that finally stayed quiet. Months later, someone asked me if I regretted canceling the wedding. I thought about the trust documents. The 7-day deadline. The way love had been measured in percentages. No, I said. I regret almost missing the warning. Because the truth is, the wedding bill was the cheapest part of that escape. What it really cost to stay would have been far higher. And that was the one price I refused to pay.